I have a serious problem. I can't read that fast. These Sanderson books are so long, and they have these wild, winding plots and complex magic systems, huge reveals. I can't keep up. Look, I feel like Sazed when I'm reading these books. The information goes in my head, and then it's like, gone. And I don't even have a copper mind that I can go look back into and reread the information, which then I guess means I just got dropped a lot as a baby. Look, you're just gonna have to be okay with like biannual Sanderson book reviews, because I feel like that's the best I can do. I'm kidding. I'm just gonna have to listen to the audiobook sometimes to speed. Mistborn Hero of Ages is the third and final installment in the Mistborn trilogy. Except for The Secret History, which I have to read before I do a full overview of the Mistborn series, and then there's like the sequel Mistborn series, which takes place 300 years after this Mistborn series. It's all sorts of complicated, but my point is, this book is the end for Vin, Elend, Sazed, and all the other members of the crew that we've come to know and love. The book opens right where Well of Ascension left off. Ruin has been released into the world and is now wreaking havoc amongst the countryside as the universe, the world itself, literally edges closer and closer to destruction. Vin, Elend, and the remaining members of Kelsier's crew must find the Lord Ruler's caches spread throughout the kingdom, hoping that the information and supplies within will be enough to defeat Ruin and bring order back to the world at large. If it sounds wild, epic, and existential, that's because it is. For starters, Sanderson is an incredibly precise storyteller. He understands the fundamentals of setup and payoff, how to hook an audience, how to subvert cliches, and how to really, really smoothly pull off a plot twist. I mean, he is like the master of plot twists. So from a narrative standpoint, Hero of Ages was compelling. You want to know the mystery, you want to know the answer, and you want to know how it ends. Which, after 2 whole books and over 1 million words of reading, can be a bit of a double-edged sword, but we'll get into that in a minute. First, we have to talk about characters. Now, at the end of the last book, we were left with the startling realization that Vin released Ruin into the world, and then in order to save Elend's life, turned him into a Mistborn. Personally, I dislike this decision. What made Vin and Elend work was their contrast. He was powerless and yet an intelligent and mature leader, a man who learned to be king. Vin was quite a bit less emotionally stable, but still as powerful as could be, constantly learning, constantly improving, and becoming a better Mistborn, eventually learning to conquer the urge to abuse her powers and save the ones that she loved. With the 2 of them as Mistborn, it just felt like a superhero film, with Sanderson handing out powers to everybody because he thought it was cool. Now, I'm not opposed to this concept entirely, but I think the way that it was done in Hero of Ages was just sloppy. To me, Vin was always the main character. Her emotional arc directly tied into her constantly increasing power through book 1 and 2, and it's what makes the finale of Well of Ascension so incredible. But in this book, she didn't really have anything to do. I mean, she had things to do, but her character arc didn't go anywhere, and it seemed like her emotional state was just a bit stagnant. Now, on the one hand, I get it. I'm not really sure where I would have taken her character either. She sort of maxed out and was at a plateau emotionally as a character in book 2. But it was also very strange given the fact that as the main character of the series, I wanted to be more invested in what she was doing this book and just wasn't. Of course, the logical conclusion would be to follow Elend. I mean, he's the second main character of the series. Their relationship is central to the Mistborn saga, but he seemed to have the opposite problem. In becoming a Mistborn in the last book, he had this whole character transformation off-screen, which us, the readers, weren't invited to. And so by the time we met him in the novel, he was a totally different character. He'd gone through a character arc that probably was very interesting, but we never saw, and now he just felt foreign and distant, unfamiliar. Now, there were obviously other compelling characters. I mean, Sazed, Marsh, Tensoon, Spook, but I will say that it was a little odd given that a lot of these characters, especially Spook and Marsh, were sort of side characters in the first 2 books, and it felt strange to me that Sanderson put more creative energy into their arcs and their storylines than maybe even Elend and Vin. At least it felt that way. The whole situation resulted in sort of a strange reading experience where I felt guilty for being way more interested in the characters that I felt like I wasn't supposed to be interested in, but then the author was more interested in, and the side characters. It was just a little odd, and while I didn't have a problem with what Sanderson was doing and the motions he was going through, it put you in an awkward position as a reader, not knowing who you were supposed to focus on or root for, or who exactly was the main character. All that being said, Sazed's character arc was superb. I mean, not only was it the ending just a wild reveal for his character, but it also answered a ton of the open questions that Sanderson had left throughout the series and throughout the book in sort of the best way possible. It was compelling and nuanced and fresh. I may be biased, but personally, I am so tired of plot lines about, corrupt religious institutions, hypocrisy, and lying priests. Of course, things like that really happen. They have throughout history, but it's been done so often that when it appears in a story, it often feels more like a way for the author to validate their personal narrative as opposed to write something unique. With Sazed, Sanderson didn't preach. He walked through the concepts with the character, through the character, simultaneously coming up with a storyline I never expected while staying perfectly true to the personality established in the other two books. It was fascinating to watch, and it's themes like this that makes me love Sanderson's writing, and it felt like for the first time he actually delved into what I thought was one of the most compelling themes of the narrative. Meanwhile, on the much less popular side of hot takes, I really disliked Spook. Well, to be clear, I just wasn't engaged. It was a good idea and an interesting character arc, but he was way too much of a side character in the other two books, and this felt like a way to fill the pages and keep us interested rather than a natural step in the narrative. Because of the tie-in with the magic system, the reveal as to why Spook was acting the way he was robbed much of the nuance of an arc like this. I love imperfect characters. We're all broken and bruised in some way, and so to watch characters in a novel struggle with the dramatic backdrop of a fantasy world to do what's right and sometimes even fail, it's one of my favorite things. But Spook didn't really even fail. He just sort of got tricked, and that wasn't even really his fault. In fact, it definitely wasn't his fault, and so all the blame fell on Ruin, and so the nuance, the complexity of an arc like that, it was certainly dulled. That, of course, brings me to Marsh. In fact, the reason I didn't really love Spook so much is exactly why I loved Marsh. Sanderson found a way to weave Ruin into Marsh's character, this kind of mind control magic system, but instead of just explaining why Marsh does everything, he focused on the struggle, the fight, the torture, the horror of a concept like that, and showed it in a really interesting way. My only slight tweak to Marsh's character overall is I just wish he had been woven into the second book a little bit more. He certainly was a big part of the first book, but it still felt a little bit random having him pop into this book and having there be such a focus with him having his own POV and kind of constantly cutting back to him and obviously playing a major role in the finale. Tensoon and the Khandra were, of course, as incredible as anyone would expect. It's more of kind of a world-building thing, but the Khandra are such a fascinating and unique fantasy culture that Sanderson came up with. On top of that, he's just a master at world building and showing different cultures, different magic systems, explaining the mechanics in a clear and precise way without it feeling too expositional. And so, yeah, to sit there with Tensoon, the character was interesting, the arc was interesting, but really for me, I think what made that so compelling was to explore his culture through his eyes, the different legal systems, the different magic systems, their different ways of going about things. I know we focused a lot on negatives, but I liked the characters, and overall, I liked the novel. I just think that the rapidly expanding stakes from book to book was something that was hard to follow, hard to kind of believe, and really gave Sanderson a challenge, especially in this third book, to not make the threat feel goofy. It didn't help that I, at least personally, think that one of Sanderson's weaker points can be his dialogue, which can be just really strange or on the nose at random points, which really jolts you out of the narrative as a reader. This, combined with such a dramatically existential antagonist like Ruin, led to some moments of just I don't know, what seemed kind of goofy and hard to believe. Now, I want to be clear, I didn't hate the book. It was a good book, it just wasn't a great book. Which sort of makes me wonder whether it's kind of Mistborn or maybe just the way that Sanderson does his book series, because I've been reading a lot of his standalone books, and honestly, I love those. I mean, y'all better be ready for my Warbreaker review. Overall, Hero of Ages was a satisfying end to a satisfying series. Had an awesome world, some great action, solid characters, and some absolutely fascinating thematic arcs. I certainly don't regret reading it, but I don't know. I just don't think I'd rush to read it again. But please, tell me what you guys thought in the comments down below. What do you guys think of the Mistborn trilogy? Do you have a favorite book? I mean, I think definitely the first Mistborn book is my favorite book just because it's so well contained. But like, I'd love to hear your guys' thoughts in the comments down below. And as always, even if you're as incredibly slow as I am, keep reading, keep writing, and I'll see you all in the next video.